Mr. Kalipersad, it's an honor to have you in the studio.
Well, thank you very much. I'm
What
honored.
I guess I mean, your name is a name that I've always heard, but I didn't experience some of your work through journalism. I think until I saw you pop up on social media, and that's where I really got to interact with, I guess, your love of the story and your little pockets of history, or your little pockets of the goings on from the histories of Trinidad and the Caribbean. And it was so consistent and so constant that it was like, well, this guy obviously loves what he's doing. And but I think I want to ask now, because I actually don't know how you got your start in all of this, in all things journalism or all things story. I would love to hear that if you don't mind sharing.
Well, it's quite an amusing story, really.
Maybe you could pull the
I,
mic a little bit
I
closer. I
had
would love
I
to hear.
had actually envisaged my future as being involved in education. I was, in fact, a school teacher.
I didn't even know that.
um, but in being a school teacher, one and being a young person at the time, one didn't realize the breadth of skill required to impart information. So, but I did like the art of storytelling and helping people to learn. And in helping people to learn, I was learning myself. But there came a time when the Prime Minister at the time, Dr. Eric Williams, declared that he was going to introduce educational television. He was going to convert then Channel 9 into an educational television channel. And then light bulb went off. Because I was young, a young man of the 70s, radical, rebellious, long hair. And I was always thinking outside the box. As a school teacher, I did a lot of things that my peers were not doing. I took my students on tours around Port of Spain, introduced them to the museum, introduced them to works of art around the city, and so on. And when I looked around me, it did appear to me that the people around me were interested in being broader than a classroom teacher. And I had these visions of of teaching being outside of the classroom. It seemed brilliant to me, a la Sesame Street, all those kinds of new media at the time approaches. So I went off to study television production, so on. And sometime after my return, by coincidence, there was a television production vacation, we call it summer, program being offered at UE, being conducted by an Australian producer. And I said, I'm on vacation, I'm on holiday, I'll go and do it.
Why not?
So I went and did it. At the end of which, each participant had to produce their own television program, which I did. I wrote a script, I did all the graphics, I did everything. And we all had to go to TTT to record these programs. So I did my little thing and pretty pleased with it. And as I was exiting the studio, someone met me at the door and said, wouldn't you like to work here?
It was one of those moments.
And I just said, okay, not knowing what. And then to my surprise, the person said, can you start tomorrow? I said, okay. And I came to work the next day.
Wow.
I hadn't even resigned from the Ministry of Education. I did subsequently during the week. And I started working at TTT. Mind you, I started working as a technical operator, doing the cameras in the studio, lighting, reeling the film on telecine, lighting the studio. You know, those lights in the studio had to push
Yeah,
with a
yeah.
rod and so on. I was too skinny and weak to even push them. But within months, someone again came to me from TTT and said, "You shouldn't be here, you know. You should be in the newsroom." So I said, "Okay," and went to the newsroom. And under the guidance of Neil Giuseppe, I became a reporter.
Wow.
So it was a meeting with destiny, a meeting with fate, and the accidental journalist.
And kind of being receptive to what came.
Well, I was always open to learning new things,
Right.
you know, and exploiting an opportunity that I think I would enjoy.
You know, which I guess would take me to my next, I guess my next thought would be, how has, I guess, journalism, I mean, besides the obvious, how has journalism evolved from the time of where it was kind of very localized and we got our news from away every so often until now where everything is in the palm of your hand every second of the day? Have you seen I mean, besides that obvious transition of evolution of journalism, I mean, does it feel more immediate now? Does it feel less important because of how much of it is we have around us at any given second?
Well, I began at a time of revolution. This was in the 70s. So not only was there revolution in the society, but the head of news at the time, who was Neil Giuseppe, really revolutionized the coverage of news locally, in that previously everything was studio bound. And he initiated the approach of going out into the outlying areas, going out and talking to people and reflecting their stories, which much of which wasn't happening previous to that. It being a state-owned station, I suppose the product primarily reflected what the government was saying. And so he really democratized the coverage of television news in Trinidad and Tobago. So I don't know it any other way.
Right.
You know, of course, there were limitations. It was film. You had to go out and shoot these reels and process the film and go and get the film edited. So it was a long process.
These days, a reel means something completely different.
Exactly. So it was as immediate as one could. And sometimes you had to do things without even any film coverage. I remember going to cover Parliament and sitting and writing notes, longhand, mind you, and writing the story in the car on the way back to the studio, and then coming to have to sit before the camera and read to camera a 3-minute story without any film coverage and so on. But come, I think, around the 1980s, when the NAR broadened the media and provided licenses, that really democratized the broadcast media in Trinidad and Tobago. And it brought some realness in that previously the newscaster was very staid and proper, uninvolved, what they call the BBC style. The radio announcers spoke nothing but the Queen's English. And there wasn't really reflecting the we as we are in all our different ways. So I think the revolution began then.
In the 80s,
In the 70s and 80s.
in the 70s and 80s, do you think, I mean, I guess being a journalist or anybody that covers news stories, current events in Trinidad over the last, like yourself, since, I'm assuming, when did you get your start?
Well,
The 70s?
This year marks 50 years I've been
Congratulations.
a news anchor.
Wow.
I don't think there's anybody else who's been on the air so long. So I have to say thanks to
That's fantastic.
the media managers for still accepting this gray-haired man still on the air, and the public for accepting me, because there's a kind of trend in local media. It's pretty youth-oriented, unlike other international stations where the older, more experienced person has credibility and weight and so on. Doesn't happen much in Trinidad. So, I have to say thank you for still accepting me.
That's huge congratulations. But just to go back to, I guess, being involved that long, you've experienced quite a bit from a completely different perspective. I mean, the population experiences it. We all experience the different things that have gone on in Trinidad. But as a journalist, you have to have the feelings of a citizen, but have almost a somewhat of a neutrality. I don't know if that's the right word, but a neutrality to it, where you need to be able to examine the story, to tell the story, hopefully with as little opinion attached as possible. In my, that's what how I like to consume my news. But what was it like being part of so many, what I would just very simply call significant events in Trinidad's history over the last 50 years, from a journalistic perspective?
Well, I've been through different kind of experiences. And in the early days at TTT, we really had to fight for the independence of the newsroom. At the time, the politically appointed board, and boards are still politically appointed, insisted on dictating what we could and could not do. And Neil Giuseppe at the time and others in the newsroom had to really battle with the management and board of TTT to allow us the freedom to cover the reality of our world. And that did happen to a large degree, but every government, almost every government that came in afterwards, sought to impose their power over the newsroom at that state-owned station. And there was a time when the state-owned newsroom was free and independent, without biases. That sort of change, it's been going back and forth. It's been going back and forth. But in terms of non-state-owned newsrooms, the experiences have been wide and diverse. Some people have had to face extreme responses from those in authority. And with the advent of digital and social media and so on, it became worse, especially for the women reporters who faced a lot of bad talk and slander and all kinds of things. There's been death threats along the way. But you stick with the information. Your opinion does not find a place in the news coverage. Of course, we have evolved into where there is opinion journalism. And that happens mainly in radio. But there are some, let's call them current affairs products that are not news products in which that happens. So I think the consumer has to be able to discern and differentiate what kind of product they're going to and consuming.
They're consuming. I'm not sure we necessarily analyze what we're consuming with that sort of lens. I think a lot of times the opinion journalism seems to find its way quite significantly into the narrative and the conversation.
Yeah. Well, we are very opinionated people, but the thing is, in legacy media, established legacy media, opinion journalism is not their product.
Well, no,
They have the straight
delivering the
journalism,
news.
but
Yeah.
let's say in the newspaper, there's space for the straight reporting and there's space for opinion, the columnists and so on. So they can exist side by side.
You've sort of embraced. I guess I want to now talk about the what social media has done, but you've embraced social media. I think it's clear in a very authentic, organic way where we get to kind of walk back in the past, or we get a footnote about this event in Trinidad and Tobago. But how has social media? I guess you've been around to kind of watch it all evolve, but social media has significantly changed quite a bit of the landscape. The fast delivery, the proliferation of information. Has it changed the politicians? Has it changed the people in charge? Because the information is so readily available and easily available?
Well, we are living in the greatest information age in the history of humankind, in which there are many, many, many platforms to share information. Do politicians ever change?
Maybe how they interact with people, but
Well, that is where the changes happen. It is more immediate. Prime ministers talk to the population through Facebook.
yeah.
I mean, that kind of direct communication has never happened in the history of humankind. It's happening now, and that has only begun happening in the 2000s,
Right.
really. So there is an opportunity for direct communication between those in charge and those they're in charge of. The question is, how are they dealing with that feedback?
And then, of course, these social media platforms allow for, as people have said internationally, the proliferation of information that may not necessarily be 100% accurate.
Right.
And we do know that there have been instances, even in Trinidad's history, politically speaking specifically, where social media was used as a tool during campaigns. I mean, how do we guard ourselves against this? How does the population discern that sort of stuff? I mean, I'm not asking you as an expert, but rather as somebody who's been part of the story ethos and the event ethos of Trinidad and Tobago for so long. I mean, how do we navigate this new world, in your opinion?
Be an adult. Be a man. Be a woman. Social media is what is perhaps almost equivalent of what long ago was a book. Right? There are various books. You choose whether you read Mao Zedong or Fanon, and what you choose to believe. But the thing is, really and truly, we've got to recognize that as an adult, as a big man, a big woman, you don't just accept the gossip that somebody tells you. So the gossip you receive on WhatsApp, be more discerning. Sometimes I would receive a WhatsApp message about X has happened. And before I even share it, I Google to verify whether this has happened.
Right.
Come on.
I mean, we have to, with information freedom, we have to have information responsibility. I guess I've borrowed that saying
But,
for this.
humans are humans. We all have our frailties. We all have our weaknesses. And the politician knows he's operating in that world, and he may well be exploiting it because some of them may be engaging trolls to do that very thing.
That's a good point. Or in today's age, AI,
Right.
and bots and
Exactly. So,
those sorts of things.
So what is your responsibility existing in today's world?
Yeah. What
We can't just go around blaming everybody for our errors. We've got to
take some personal responsibility at some point. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I guess this is a cop-out question, but what's an iconic moment from your career that you would say stands out now in your 50th year of the profession? What's probably one or some of your iconic moments? You've been there for so much, and I'm kind of curious how you view it.
You know, that's kind of a,
Unfair question.
well, I don't know if it's unfair, but you know, it's one of those questions I hate. It's one of those questions, you know, I hear people ask people who've been a long time. And, you know, sometimes it's the simplest things. People expect to hear you broke that story or you, I just hate it. But sometimes it's the simplest moment when you did what appeared to be a simple story about somebody needing help. You know, and you're able to reflect that person's pain, which is a sort of symbol of communities of people who are living below the poverty line, who are suffering, need help. And that person does get some relief, some assistance. To me, that kind of story brought the greatest joy. Yes, we've had battles with politicians. Yes, politicians burned the newspaper in Woodford Square protesting against me. Yes, I had to be sent out of the country for my safety. Yes, politicians. You know, there have been battles with politicians, but I think they've always recognized that the products that I either delivered or caused to be delivered were never about personal opinion, but they were professional fact. So for the most part, the battles would have happened because of X, never personal. So the relationship never became never affected because
Right,
of
too much of a
personal
battle.
interpretation.
Yeah. I guess.
I mean, I pulled a minister off the air once because he was
Tell me about that.
going on. He began speaking as though he were on a platform, and it wasn't that was the subject about. He was campaigning, so I stopped the interview.
Were you were interviewing him?
No, I was the head of
Right. Oh, got it.
department. Stopped the interview. He was mad. He called the complaint. La, 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 la. But I was fortunate to be working in a truly independent organization at the time, CCN, that was prepared to do battle with whoever. And the CEO said, "That's not my call. That's the head of news's call," and that was the end of that.
But yeah, it's always interesting. I mean, I watch the news as a skeptic most of the times. I don't watch it to hear what's going on. I watch it to kind of know what I need to research, because there's so much goes on, and it's not to say just the news, but it's also the stories that, and because when a politician's speaking, it's not the news's opinion. They're just relaying the story. But a lot of times I watch with just, I don't know, I don't believe everything right away. And I think that that's how we should be watching things these days. It doesn't necessarily need to be, not necessarily that I don't believe what I'm reading or what people are saying, but it's just, I know that there's so much misinformation out there, and there's a lot to gain. And yeah, it was just more of a situation where I want more transparency overall with politicians, not necessarily with the news and the media.
Well, that's good. Not everyone is like you. But we do need to hear what those in charge are saying
Yes.
and what the opposition is saying as well. So that's important for people to know. Where I think the media may come up short in this day and age is there sufficient analysis? Is there sufficient fact-checking?
Right.
So that the analysis may help you as the viewer, may help guide your thinking process. not everyone necessarily may read the columns or the articles written by columnists who tend to be a little highbrow and,
A lot more opinionated.
well, opinion is important too once
Yeah.
it comes from a credible source.
Yeah.
But I think the average Joe are not necessarily reading the columnists. But if the analysis is within the news product, with the involvement of the journalists and other people who in the know, then I think it may help guide the thinking process of the consumer.
What do you? I'm going to completely switch it up now and completely just as we kind of start to kind of close out. What did you think of this year's election from the perspective of it seemed to be less advertising? It seemed to have less. I mean, you obviously have a way more intimate perspective,
No,
but
I mean,
point of view.
I'm no longer a practicing journalist, so I don't know why you
Well-
might think I have.
But no, well, just because you may may have a
But it seemed to me,
An idea.
it
But
seemed
I
to me
didn't
that millions of dollars were spent.
yes,
in
but I didn't see.
advertising.
I guess I didn't see the flyers stuck on the walls around Port of Spain and on
Or maybe
every.
they become more environmentally conscious.
Okay, right. Well, maybe that's what it is. That's what it is. But it seemed like it was a it was also a short election period, campaign
It
period.
was short, and maybe the politicians have come to recognize that using the more popular
Digital-
new media,
digital
digital
formats.
media, works more than sticking posters on
and spray paint in the ground.
spray painting the ground. I mean, that is 1950s kind of campaigning. isn't
Yeah.
it?
I just remember seeing it as 5 and 10 years ago, as recent as 5
Well,
and 10 years.
yes. Well, we take a long time to step into the present, you know.
That's so true. Any closing remarks? Any advice for young people wanting to get involved in journalism? I guess from a new age perspective, you are pretty active on social media.
Ask yourself, why? Why do I want to do this? And that-
Find your why, as they say.
Find your why.
Yeah.
Because it can't be because I want to be on TV or I want to hear my voice on radio. There has to be a higher calling.
I am a big fan of your social media feed, your Instagram feed specifically. I see it all the time. I cannot pass it by. Any plans for something more formal?
Well, listen, I am officially retired. But, you know, when things like Twitter just started and so on, I, as the older person, had to encourage the younger ones. You should be, we should be there. We should have a presence there. And they were reluctant. Of course, they're all on it now. I'm giving the Twitter handle in the television news programs that everybody's doing now. So even some of these young people have been slow in getting involved in these platforms and so on. But in doing so, from the point of a journalist, are you going to be involved for frippery or talk, or are you going to be involved for the purpose of elevating and engaging or being educational? So I decided that if I'm going to be involved in that space, it had to be one in something in which I'm interested and didn't have the time previously because, when you're involved in the news business, you're working long hours. So if I was involved in that space, the content had to be something informative and educational and something in which I was interested. So having the time now, I'm able to do the research, which takes a long time, and compose the narratives and so on and do it. So that's basically it. I do it because I enjoy it and I don't think there are many opportunities in that space in which that kind of content exists. Although I do see some young people attempting to do it, and in fact doing it on TikTok.
Right.
But TikTok is not for people like
Well, no, I would disagree. I think TikTok would absolutely love if you did some sort
No,
of
I think they would
a,
love
a
they would
true
love that kind of
crime
yeah.
or a storytelling from
Yeah.
a
Sure.
because I mean you clearly have a love for
Sure.
story.
Sure. Well, they love that kind. Yes, TikTok is a place for that kind of content. Oh my God, to edit and oh my goodness.
We could help you. We could help you, man. That's easy. That's easy.
It's a lot of work, but I am sure in yourself in developing your YouTube channel, have come to realize the amount of work and
Of
effort that
course,
goes into that, and
Cameron definitely knows. He's he's
you
behind the
know,
computers editing all of
yes,
our
you know,
episodes.
and but I am not interested in monetizing or making financial gain out of it. And people like you and others, I'm sure. I met a young person recently who is making a salary from his YouTube content
Yeah.
and so on. But hopefully, my work may help inspire you and others to go for it and
Well,
make some money from it.
it definitely has. I mean, inspiring for sure. I mean, I'm a big fan of. I kind of have one of my life mottos is never stop learning. I love to watch YouTube. I consider myself to have a PhD at YouTube from YouTube University. Anytime I want to learn about something or learn how to do something, I go straight to YouTube.
Well, I'm discovering also that in recent time there is a lot more misleading content on YouTube.
Well, yes, everywhere, but
So
yes,
it exists everywhere.
yeah.
I mean, I see some stuff about Donald Trump and the Caribbean and he's going to do, and I'm saying, this is so untrue and misleading.
It's easy. It's kind of I think that part, the misleading part, is really where the opinion media is being passed off as just fact.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of people's opinions who are kind of proliferated through these news stories. And I guess that's where we get a lot of that's propaganda,
Well,
right?
the time may be arriving where, especially in this part of the world, and maybe the world over, one might have to is either the definition of the journalist is broadening, or you need to redefine what is a journalist. Because anybody who has anything to say can now call themselves
A journalist.
a journalist.
And with AI, now the advent of AI and it being so easily accessible, I mean, I think within a year, we're not going to know if a video is real or fake. It's already starting.
Yeah. Well, it's also an exciting opportunity. We are at the embryonic stage of everything.
Yeah.
So things would go wrong, things would be misused, and then it would develop into something great. I mean, when television was invented and first demonstrated in the UK, the entire society in England thought this would destroy society.
People would just stay home and watch TV.
Yeah, not people, but the kind of things that would be on. And when Elvis Presley came on the scene and he was whining his hips, and everybody thought, "Oh my God, society would be destroyed, the moral decay." Everything starts with mistakes and error, and then it evolves into something great. So I think we've got to learn how to embrace it and utilize it to its advantage. There are new ethical philosophies that would have to come into play, or that we would have to come to terms with. So I'm not one of those persons who is increasing with age, saying, "Oh, we didn't used to do it this way, and we should do it that way." No, whatever is new is exciting opportunity.
Well, I enjoy that perspective. I appreciate it. And thank you for coming on. It's been a great chat. And we'd love to have you on again. I wanna maybe we'll do a news type show where you could talk about history and all of the posts that you
Well,
post on
let's
social
make
media.
it clear. I am not a historian,
Right, I know.
but I am an avid researcher of our Trinidadian and Caribbean history. So I do a lot of research and try to verify it and try to bear in mind that much of our history has been written by the conqueror, which is different to the history as seen by the conquered. So I try to bring that modern sensitivity to the writing of our history.
Do you think that enough is taught? And now that a last question, do you think enough is being taught in schools to help us?
Well, I'm not in the school, so I don't know, but I do get the impression that it is taught, but it's still being taught from a European
Right,
perspective.
right.
So there needs to be a revolution in our education system across the board.
Well, I agree there.
Across the board. It cannot be that in 2025 we are still doing some form of educational television with a chalk and blackboard.
Right.
You see it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
You know, who are you communicating with?
Yeah, we need to advance.
Which child is going to substitute the blackboard in a classroom for the blackboard on a screen? It's not making sense. So, you know, we've got to, the technology is there for us to embrace and exploit.
Yeah, that's true.
We're doing that, you know, and we have the great opportunity, you know, we are so not exploiting the various technologies that exist. Trinidad has the opportunity to signal to the rest of the world how we can exploit to make life easier and more. Why is it so difficult not to have charging banks across Brian Lara Promenade? Just have charging banks there. You know, so you come off the Maxi Taxi Hub,
And you could plug your phone
you
in.
plug your phone, you know, you have a devil outside, you plug your phone, you know, there's a screen there for a little entertainment. You know, why is there music piping through Port of Spain to reduce the stress levels in the city? You know, why are we still having blackboard and chalk teaching education television?
Yeah.
It's there.
There's a lot of things that can be done to modernize, you know, the experience of even just isolating Port of Spain by itself. We can modernize Port of Spain. We can modernize the major city centers.
If we could make Port of Spain a green city,
Yeah.
you know, reduce the pollution. And I am in my mind, and I'm no expert, I am certain that if we make Port of Spain a green city, if we pipe music through the city, it would reduce the stress levels in Port of Spain, and it would reduce crime in Port of Spain.
There was a study that I read that echoes that sentiment. It's called, I think the movement is called greening, where just taking dilapidated car parks and lots, empty lots of land, and turning them into green spaces for people to actually walk past and see. A lot of our green spaces are kind of off the footpath of downtown Port of Spain, and that changes, it reduces crime, it reduces stress.
Yeah, parallel with that, I think that we have lost our sense and appreciation of beauty. So when we look around us, we're not seeing beauty. We're not seeing beautiful plants. We're not seeing beautiful flowers. We're not seeing beautiful paintings. All we're seeing
Even the architecture has changed.
architecture, concrete monstrosities. So beauty is not part of our psyche in recent years. It's all about selfish behavior,
Industrialism and
you know. So
capitalism.
I think if there is a return of environmental beauty, there will be a return to beauty of the mind.
It certainly contributes. I would agree with that.
But that's just my layman view. What the hell do I know?
I think that your opinion is more than valid. I think people would would feel the same way. But again, thank you so much for coming on. This has been awesome.
Appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. Look forward to having you back again.
Thanks again.
Cheers.